Welcome back to the Dershow. The list, the infamous list, the Jeffrey Epstein list of the hundreds of people who had associations with Jeffrey Epstein is being disclosed. Of course, I'm on the list. I was his lawyer. I flew on his plane with other lawyers several times for legal meetings in Florida and other proceedings. Um, I was his lawyer. Not only did I fly on his plane as his lawyer, I flew with Senator John Glenn to meet President Shimon Peres of Israel. Um, I took my nephew on a flight to Cape Canaveral to see a satellite launch. Um, I was invited by the head of NASA through his close friend Jeffrey Epstein to see the launch, like so many others. I had an innocent relationship with a man who I didn't know, nobody suspected, had done anything wrong. Indeed, when my granddaughter had a soccer tournament, he lent us his house in Florida. He wasn't there, but my whole family, my grandchildren, my daughter stayed there. There were no pictures on the wall or anything that would lead anyone to suspect that anything untoward was going on. There's no way I would ever allow my grandchildren, my children, to be in a house that eventually turned out to have been the location for so many questionable and illegal activities. But so there are lots of people on that list, and lots of different categories. There are people who were associated with him academically, like the president of Harvard, people who are nominated for the Nobel prizes in science, who went to academic lunches with him. He had an office right outside of Harvard in Brattle Square, where he would conduct these seminars. And we all went. We loved them because I got introduced to Harvard professors who I had never met, even though I had been on the Harvard faculty at that point for 30 or so years. And yes, I was on the island once. My wife, my daughter, and I were vacationing in the Caribbean, and he had just bought this island. It was, just one little house on it. There was nobody on the island except work people. And he asked us to come say hello and visit the island. So I did and had dinner with Michael Porter, a very distinguished professor at Harvard Business School. No young people on the island, no Lolita Island or Express or anything like that. So there were people who knew him before any of these accusations were made public. There were people who knew him when the accusations were made public, his lawyers like me and his doctors and others who didn't terminate the association. Indeed, my association with him increased after he was accused. I became his lawyer, and I met with him repeatedly to try to work out a plea bargain which the public thinks was a sweetheart deal. He hated it. In fact, he wouldn't pay me my fee because he thought I had done a terrible, terrible job in getting him a plea bargain that required him to serve some time in jail and also to register as a sex offender. Then there are the groups of people who continue to associate with him even after he was in prison, after he had pleaded guilty. Remember, too, he had pleaded guilty, my recollection is, to two offenses, one involving an 18-year-old and one involving a 17-year-old, both of whom he paid for massages and other kind of sexual encounters. But the large number of people who subsequently accused him hadn't come out at that point yet, and so he was allowed to plead guilty only to these two charges. He then served his time and he got out, and some people either continued to associate with him who knew him from the past. I did not. I just took his calls when they were legal calls involving the plea bargain we had made, but others had closer relationships with him. Bill Clinton traveled on his plane for charitable activities, Bill Gates, others, but everybody has to be judged on their own individual situation. You can criticize people for continuing to have any association with Epstein after he pleaded guilty to these offenses, but the full extent of his activities was not known at that point. Um, And then there were those who were accused. Initially, I was among them. Of course, the accusation against me from day one, I knew and said and proved was totally and completely false. And the woman who accused me ultimately admitted that she may have mistaken me for somebody else. It may have been a case of mistaken identification, and she dropped all of her lawsuits and legal claims against me. Others were accused as well. The former Majority Leader of the Senate, John Mitchell, the former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Bill Richardson, Ehud Barak. I have no idea whether any of them were or weren't in any way complicit, but each case has to be judged on its merits, and you should not accept guilt by accusation, as was a title of a book I wrote, or guilt by association, which is a common term. When I hear about a list, I always think of the infamous lists by Senator McCarthy. I have a list of employees of the State Department who are members of the Communist Party. Well, no, he didn't. He had lists of names, and those names had their careers destroyed. Some committed suicide, as some who were accused in the Epstein case, including Epstein himself, may have committed a suicide. Some other person from France did as well, according to at least police records. So it's so important to judge complicity, guilt, responsibility on an individual basis. We're so tempted to just assume that if a person's name is on a list, oh, there must be something wrong. If there's smoke, there's fire. There's already one lawsuit been threatened. Jimmy Kimmel has threatened to sue Aaron Rodgers because apparently Rodgers has said something about him being on a list. Now, the interesting question, is it defamatory for somebody to falsely accuse you of being on a list? The list itself may not involve any kind of accusation of criminality, but any association with Epstein these days is radioactive. And it'll be interesting to see if a lawsuit were to be filed. The other interesting thing that everybody has to remember, and Judge Jose Cabranes, a great judge in the Second Circuit in New York, made this point in an opinion, that when an accusation is made in court papers, as these accusations, which are on the list, presumably, will have been made in court papers, Judge Cabranes reminded us that accusations made in court papers are actually less credible, less believable, less deserving of being credited than accusations made in the media. Why? Because if you accuse somebody falsely in the media, you can be sued for defamation. But if you make your accusation in court papers, there's what's called immunity. You can't be sued. And so Judge Cabranes said to the media, he issued an actual warning to the media and to the public. Remember that when something is in a court paper, that doesn't mean it's more credible. It may very well be less credible, because a false accuser can hide behind the privilege and make a false accusation without any fear of being sued. So when this list comes out, and if it includes accusations, people will assume the accusations must be true, but there is little reason to believe that. One has to assess them on their own credibility. Again, the accusations against people who are dead, obviously, and several of the accusations are against people who are either dead or unable to respond. George Mitchell, Bill Richardson, and others. Some have chosen not to respond. I chose to respond very overtly because I had nothing to hide. In fact, I was one of the people who pushed very hard for these documents to be released. I want every single piece of paper, every document to be released because I have nothing to hide, and the truth will help and prove my absolute innocence. So I'm not, there are people shaking in their boots that their names will be mentioned. I knew my name would be on whatever documents there are associated with Jeffrey Epstein, and I welcome them as long as everything is released. What I'm afraid of is this judge may very well be selective in her decisions to release, and release some things but not others. For example, if somebody accuses somebody the accuser has to be identified. The accuser's background has to be given. Whatever is in the record about the accuser's credibility should be made public. Not only the accusation, not only the name of the accused, but the law today often doesn't do that. It presumes guilt and therefore allows the false accuser to hide behind anonymity or behind court documents while the falsely accused has no remedy. So, let the media is obsessed with any connection to Jeffrey Epstein. Bill Clinton, yeah, Bill Clinton knew Jeffrey Epstein. I can testify to that personally because I had an experience with that. I was having dinner. My wife and I were having dinner with Caroline Kennedy and her husband on Martha's Vineyard, and Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton were there. And at this small dinner party, and the Secret Service, he was present. The Secret Service came over to him and said, "Here's a phone call to you." And he took the call, went away for a few minutes and talked and talked and talked. And then he came back and he said, "Alan, somebody wants to say hello to you." And he gave me the phone. It was Jeffrey Epstein, who had been talking to Bill Clinton for a while. And then Epstein wanted to say hello to me. So, I can testify from firsthand experience that Bill Clinton knew Jeffrey Epstein, but I can't go beyond that. And I assume he's telling the truth when he says he was never on Epstein's island, just as I'm telling the truth when I say I was on the island once with my wife and my daughter and Michael Porter, and no young people were on the island. It had just been bought and it was in the process of being built. Um, so the important thing is not to assume guilt by association or guilt by accusation, but make an assessment based on the totality of the evidence. That's why I hope all the evidence comes out, not just smatterings of names of lists. Remember, lists. Uh, McCarthyism lists. I have a list. I have a list, and lists themselves are meaningless and dangerous and can deny people civil liberties. The other point I want to make is there should be a list. I want to see a list. I want a list produced of radical feminists, people from the Me Too movement, people who accuse others, people who believe that you should believe any woman who makes an accusation. I want to see a list of those people who did not condemn Hamas for what we now know for 100% certainty was a policy of raping Jewish women and girls. We have eyewitness testimony. We have forensic testimony. Unfortunately, most of the people who were raped were also killed. And so tragically, they can't testify. But the evidence of Hamas rapes and that it was a policy to rape, and they were instructed to rape, and that they raped children, and that they cut off the breasts of women and threw them around like footballs, the most horrible thing documented by the New York Times, by the Wall Street Journal, and by videotapes that some people have seen, gathering all the forensic evidence of the rapes and the sexual assaults. And yet, where is Me Too? Me Too, but not if you're a Jew? Is that what Me Too is about? Me Too, except don't believe Israelis? You can believe Hamas, but don't believe Israelis. Hamas has denied that they had any rapes. The evidence is overwhelming. Where are the radical feminists? Where are those who think that the worst thing in the world is to be on an Epstein list, but it's okay to rape and mutilate and behead and kidnap and murder innocent Israelis? I want a list of those people. I want them to be exposed in the court of public opinion. I want to know where these radical feminists are. I want to know where these movements are. I want to know where these lawyers are who have made fortunes and fortunes of money making accusations, but have remained silent. I want to know where the National Lawyers Guild is, who says that they are at the forefront of defending women who have been victimized, but they have supported Hamas. They blame what happened on October 7th on Israel. They claim that what Hamas did was appropriate military action: rape, mutilation, beheadings, kidnappings, military action. Only in the eyes of radical National Lawyers Guild people. So hypocrisy is rampant. If you want to believe women, believe all women. First of all, no one should be believed or disbelieved because of their gender. Every accusation of rape, whether made by victims of Jeffrey Epstein or victims of Hamas, should be investigated and taken seriously. That's what Israel did. Um, some should be believed and some shouldn't. Everyone should be based on the merits and credibility of the accusers, on the forensic evidence, on eyewitness testimony, on the usual engines of truth, cross-examination. The problem with these lists and the Epstein list is that the lists are predominantly court papers, and court papers, accusations made in court papers, are generally privileged, and that means that people can make false accusations with impunity without fear of being sued. That's why if an accusation is in a court paper, it should be given less credibility than if it's done in the media where lawsuits are possible. We live in a strange time when certain accusations are believed more credibly than others, depending on the politics. We live in the age of identity politics. It's not what happened to you, it's who you are. If you're an Israeli, no, you're an oppressor. We're not going to believe you. There was a group of people who said that the Israelis who claimed rape were just like white people who claimed that black people raped them in the South during the Jim Crow period. We know there were false accusations of rape made by white women or their husbands or their boyfriends that resulted in the lynching of black people. Some were just, wolf whistles, like in the Emmett Till case. We know that there were false accusations, but the idea to compare Ku Klux Klan inspired false accusations leading to lynching to what happened in Israel is so bigoted and biased. Yeah, there is one word in common: lynching. That's what happened to 1,200 Israelis. They were lynched. That's right, they were lynched. Lynching doesn't require a noose. Many of the black people who were lynched were shot, and that's what happened to the Israelis. They were lynched. But the idea that radical feminists, some, not all, but I have to tell you, the silence among many radical feminists about what happened on October 7th is deafening, I have a rule. If you're a radical feminist and you haven't in any way protested the rapes and the murders and the beheadings and the sexual assaults of other kinds, the mutilations of the Israeli and Jewish women on October 7th, then you have no credibility. Nobody should believe a word you say. You're then using rape as a political tool, just the way Hamas used rape as a military tool. You're using rape to make selective accusations against people you don't approve of, whereas you're remaining silent and sometimes, like the National Lawyers Guild, even supporting the rapes. The National Lawyers Guild again said that what happened on October 7th, and we know what happened, rapes and mutilations, was an appropriate military activity. And Norman Finkelstein, who claims to be a feminist too, said it warmed every part of his heart to see these horrible brutalities that occurred on October 7th. And so when you read the lists, read it with discernment. That's a word that was used by Judge Cabranes. Read it with discernment, especially the parts of it that deal with accusations, some of which may be true, some of which may be false. But in America, we base guilt on individual culpability, on the facts, on evidence. I know we live in a post-evidence world where we no longer care about facts, we no longer care about evidence, we care more about who you are, what your race is, what your gender is. But that's not the American way. That's not the way of the Constitution. The way of the Constitution is proof beyond a reasonable doubt by admissible evidence based on credible testimony or scientific provable evidence. That's what America was based on. That's what the Bill of Rights is based on. That's what Abraham Lincoln demanded when he defended people throughout the state of Illinois. That's what Thurgood Marshall demanded. That's what great lawyers have demanded from the beginning of time. Clarence Darrow, Ed Bennett Williams. Evidence, evidence, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, not lists. So these lists, read them and smirk and giggle and feel good about yourself because you're not on it and Bill Gates is on it. Doesn't mean Bill Gates did anything wrong or Bill Clinton did anything wrong. The accusations, some of them are preposterous. There was one set of allegations. I don't know if it'll be in the list or not, in which a woman claimed she had videotapes of Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump together having sex with underage boys and girls. That is probably going to be in the papers released. I hope so. If it's not, then it's been selectively edited, and the credibility of the list has to be questioned. So let's explore carefully what's on the list and what's not on the list, because I know about things that should be on the list. And if they're not on the list, I will report on them and wonder why they have been omitted, why the public has been denied the right to see material that might cast some doubt on the credibility of at least certain accusers. So I'm not worried about the list. I anticipate I'll get calls about it, and but I've never shunned away from talking about anything about this because I have nothing to hide, absolutely nothing to hide. So let's look at some letters today. Uh, Dr. Gay is being retained as a professor. Harvard doesn't have the guts to can her for plagiarism. There was a report this morning on Fox News that her salary has not been reduced, that it's $900,000. I can tell you, I was a professor at Harvard for 50 years and now emeritus for 10. I never received anywhere near that salary. That probably is the salary for the president of Harvard, and probably well deserved for a good president of Harvard. But there's no reason why she should be allowed to retain her presidential salary if she's returned to being an ordinary professor. And as far as whether she should be an ordinary professor, there should now be a completely objective review of all of the plagiarism allegations, some of which seem not substantial, others of which seem on their face to be more substantial. But what we need is a group of 3 or 5 eminent, distinguished scholars who have no association with Harvard, who don't know President Gay, who haven't taken a position on this, who are experts in what constitutes plagiarism and the scientific method, and let them make a recommendation, a public recommendation in a report. And she should be treated like everybody else. When I wrote my book, The Case for Israel, Norman Finkelstein, the same guy whose heart was warmed by the rapes, the murders, the pillaging, the horrors, accused me. He said, I didn't write my book, The Case for Israel. The Shin Bet wrote it, or the Mossad wrote it, and I just signed it. Fortunately, I read everything by hand, and I was able to produce a 600-page handwritten document that showed I wrote every single word of it. But I was accused, and the first thing I did is I went to the dean of Harvard. At the time, it was Elena Kagan, now a justice of the Supreme Court. And I said, I demand that you investigate me. I don't want this allegation hanging out there. And she appointed somebody, the former president of Harvard, Derek Bach, to investigate the allegations against me. And Bach said they were absurd. He didn't even understand them. They were nonsense, and totally dismissed them. And partly as a result of making these false accusations against me, Norman Finkelstein was denied tenure at DePaul University. The right decision, the decision made by DePaul, not by me. But part of the reason may have been a false accusation of plagiarism directed against me. So there are false accusations of plagiarism, just like there are false accusations of rape and sexual assault. And I think it's important for the presumption of innocence now to surround President Gay as she returns to being a professor. I hope she's not guilty of serious enough plagiarism to warrant any kind of discipline. But if she is, she has to be treated like anyone else would be treated. She was not fired because of her race. She may have been hired in part because of her race. There are allegations that the people who appointed her limited their serious considerations to candidates who satisfied the DEI criteria: diversity, skin deep, only not diversity of ideas, equity, not equality, but equity and inclusion, which excludes some groups, particularly Jews and Asians. So, no, she wasn't fired because of a race. She was fired because of meritocracy. She failed the test of meritocracy. She did not do a good job in the 6 months, including her disastrous testimony in front of Congress and her alleged misconduct academically. Even her retirement letter, the letter in which she indicated she was going to resign, sounds like it was written by lawyers. You know, she allegedly plagiarized even the acknowledgments in her PhD. That's the one thing that's supposed to come from the heart. Oh, thank you so much for the work you did helping me on this. But she copied that from somebody else too. She seems to be a copycat. Whether that rises to the level of disciplinary plagiarism, I leave to experts. We'll see what happens. You shouldn't be the person fighting for Israel, even if you were 25. You can serve in other ways, which will do more good, like as an advocate, either in court or through the media. Well, that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to act my age. I'm 85, and at 85, I think I have a lot of experience, a lot of knowledge about what's going on in the Middle East, but the ability to shoot an Uzi is probably something that people could do better than I could. So I'm not jumping on a plane and going to fight in Gaza, but I will do anything I can to defend Israel's legitimate interests and its right to a fair accounting. Um, okay. Media, Congress, DOJ, universities, justices, a joke with checks and balances. No, I don't agree with that. Checks and balances require, I said yesterday that the checks and balances go beyond what we learn in civics. So many institutions serve as checks, and the firing of Gay show that alumni can serve as checks, the media can serve as checks, Congress can serve as checks. None of them is perfect standing alone, but altogether, they very well may create accountability. All right, here's one that I get all the time. Lloyd was not killed; he died. No, the evidence is that the the policeman putting his knee on his neck certainly was a contributing factor. We're not sure about the medical evidence. Look, I had a case some years ago where I was able to get somebody acquitted of murder and attempted murder charge because we were able to prove that the bullet was not the cause of his death. He had died previously, and my client had shot him at a time when the government couldn't prove he was still alive. So these are issues that are legitimately of concern to the courts. Not according to Al Sharpton. This is just begging of DEI. Al Sharpton, his claim that she was fired because of her race is itself racist. I mean, you judge people based on their own accomplishments or lack thereof. And with Sharpton, if you're a person of color, then you can't be judged on your own credibility. You have to be judged only on your race. And if you're black and you were fired, it must be because you were black, not because you performed your role incompetently. And then what I mentioned yesterday, Gay probably plagiarized her resignation letter. No, it was actually a very poorly written letter. What struck me so much about her testimony and her statements after October 7th, they just lacked authenticity. They lacked a sense of genuineness. And final letter: bring back Lawrence Summers, get rid of DEI. I don't think Larry's coming back. His departure was part of the problem. I mean, he was fired because of DEI hadn't yet come into existence as a concept, but he was fired because he said something controversial about the difference between men and women. And all the people who are now saying, "Oh my God, all President Gay did was exercise their free speech rights, and all the Palestinian protesters did was exercise their free speech rights." Where were they when Larry Summers was fired? Where were they when he made a controversial statement about the differences between men and women? And he was fired because of it. There was a great cartoon. I don't remember, it was in the Globe or somewhere else, but at the time of his firing, it had Larry Summers on his hands and knees before the Harvard Corporation saying, "No, I didn't say that women are not as good at math and physics as men. What I said is that Israel is an apartheid state. Now can I have my job back?" Yeah, of course it depends on what you say. And so these are stories that will continue to resonate. Will the firing of Gay be a watershed moment? I hope so. Will the publication of the list of Epstein associates be a watershed moment? No, it won't be. It will just be a moment of gossip and people pounding themselves on the chest saying, "I'm a better person than Gates. I didn't associate with Epstein." And so stay tuned, and I'm sure next week we'll be back with follow-ups on these interesting and important stories. See you next week.